You probably have better vision than I do, so I can't actually tell.
We're doomed.
Hey,
Hello!
Happy New Year! We're finally in 2021.
We survived 2020.
Which was a decade.
It was might as well
At
have
least
been.
felt like
It
one.
was,
anyway.
it's got all the weight. We made it, we crawled through, and as is our wont, this is our best of 2020 post.
Like always, it's gonna be a pretty long video.
Well, only
a
'cause
little
it's like
hefty.
two
It's like
people.
30 books or
Yeah,
books
well,
slash
because
series.
between the both of us. So, it's just a
maybe
matter
grab
of
a snack.
I don't know, like
Have
put on
something
some
nice to
coffee.
drink.
I brought some tea.
Get a
and easily the largest
comfortable-
mug that I could find.
So that you can just listen to us talk about all the books that we really, really enjoyed in 2020. The books that got us through 2020.
And these are the books that did get us through, like Alexa said, 2020, or at least helped us coast through some of the worst of it.
Distracted us from some of the stress
and
anxiety.
And to nobody's surprise, the books that we deem easily the best of. So, all right, real quick, first 5, bottom tier, but certainly not the least of the books that I've read this year.
Sure.
I want to give a quick shout out to Everafter, which is the series set after the events of the Fables series.
Oh, okay.
So Fables has been a huge deal when it came out because it did take the lore of every single storybook character, every fable that ever existed, as having them all come from a different land, but because of a terrible adversary, they had to move here to New York City and plant their own little, fable town.
Yes.
And the shenanigans ensue from there. We visit the homelands, things that happen. The story centered around Snow White and Big B Wolf, the big bad wolf, who is the sheriff of Fabletown, and Snow White at the time was, I want to say, the deputy mayor.
Deputy mayor, yes.
Which is the most ridiculous office romance you'll ever find. Everafter focuses on the characters of the next generation, actually, of Fabletown.
Cool.
I liked it because, contrary to, I think there not too many people did, and it only had like a 3-volume run, so obviously that didn't do as well as we would like. But I liked it because I like following characters that I do love. It's the only reason we watch Boruto. In spite of its own merits, a lot of people have been hating on it. But there is that. So if you did like Fables, Everafter is worth sort of a look. I'm gonna go next to Coffin Hill, which centers around a member of the Coffin clan of witches. Okay. She is the most recent of the line and is trying to sort of like turn away from a previous life of bad juju and bad magic, only to find herself kind of dragged straight back in. The reason why I love this series and it made it sort of into this pile is that it gave me that late 90s, early 2000s supernatural vibe. And by supernatural, I don't just mean like Dean and whatever. I meant like the supernatural females, female characters vibe. So Buffy and Charmed, OG Charmed.
Yeah.
And I loved it. It was just, it's brutal and it's gruesome, but not in an overly excessively morbid kind of way. Like it's not like Saw where it's just shock value. So it gives it that like actual supernatural, magical, kind of like paranormalness that we sort of lack these days because everything's it's just a different world. So this gives it that feel. War of the Spark, the duology that came out. Those of you who've been watching us all of 2020 know that we've been on a Magic the Gathering kick. But I've been a huge fan of Magic the Gathering for a while, in my younger years. And Ravnica having its own sort of like block, and Ravnica is another plane and whatever. But needless to say, of all of the games in the Magic the Gathering sort of set of expansions, they took the newest characters, which is a bunch of young and upcoming planeswalkers, and pitted them against a really, really old character from the first ever Magic expansions, who has decided to go, I don't care for the fact that I have lost all of my godhood.
Sure.
I shall regain it back. And so it pits them against that dude, and their final battleground was on Ravnica itself, which is my favorite. So they took really cool new characters that I've loved, a really old character that I sort of knew, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool, and set the final battle on the plane that I am in love with personally. And it was so great. So without boring you too much, do look it up. It does end rather well. Ships abound if you're me. And I have never shipped 2 characters so hard and actually play those cards. And they're actually on boxes. So for those of you who might know, there is a Gate Crash expansion where it's got 2 characters on there, Aurelia, the war leader, and Guildmaster of the Boros Legion, and Gideon Jura, who is one of the Gatewatch folks. And they're always there, and I thought it was a buddy cop comedy until I saw like the smiles they were giving each other. I'm like, I'm living for this! Even if it's just a crack ship. Anyway, Buffy season 12, speaking of which, of things from my past, I want to sort of move back into
the paranormal,
back to the paranormal supernatural thing, because what happened was after Buffy season 7, which was officially the last season of Buffy Vampire Slayer on TV, it was the UPN back in the day, they decided to create canon comics that would continue. So season 8, 9, 10, 11, and finally they just ended at 12, right before Boom took over the franchise and rebooted
and
it.
redid it.
And redid it. So I didn't even know that they finished like 12 until I saw the collected edition. I was like, I need to get my hands on this. And you know what? I'll say this right now. it lifts a lot of lines from both the Buffy and the Angel TV series to the point where it got a little heavy-handed for me personally. But at the same time, I don't care because I just am that hungry for it. Like, maybe if there was maybe if there was such a good amount of Buffy books, I would probably go, oh, why would they do that? It's a little cheesy. But since I'm like hungry for actual good old-fashioned Buffy, I'm like, I'll take it. Give me all the lines and the cheesy lines. And oh my god. Because I have memorized some of the iconic lines from the TV series. That's one of the things that made Buffy. So to have those lines revisited, to have a recapitulation, felt like, all right, if you were going to end it anyway, then fine. This is, for me, an okay way to end it. Obviously, others would have a different opinion, but personally, this fan is like, I'll take it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Leading me to my top of my bottom most 5. That would be a ranking at number 11. For those of you who have been counting at home, clearly I'm a Tamara Pierce fan, and my wife is an awesome gift giver because duh.
Actually, my top is also a Christmas gift from Macky.
My book, number 11 out of my top 15 would have to be Tempests and Slaughter by Tamara Pierce.
Really good.
It is set in her Tortal universe. Thank you, Tammy, for posting videos online. That way I know how your stuff is actually pronounced. And for years I've been calling it Tortle. So it is set in that universe, and it is a prequel focusing on one of that universe's most powerful mages. When we meet him for the first time in the stories, and we will talk more about that in a bit,
yes,
we find out that this unassuming, tall, lanky, easygoing, sort of nerdy mage is actually one of the only, like, 8, 9, maybe, I forget, it's a single-digit number, black robe mages in all of the world. A graduate from the University of Karthak, which is another country across the sea that is extremely problematic and wages a lot of wars. This is that particular mage's story in his youth. His name is Numair Salmalin, as we get to know him, but in his youth he was apparently called Aram Draper. So this is Aram's story. Love Aram pretty much from day one, and this book is such a great addition to anyone who has loved the Tortal universe. It's worth the read. If you're not a Tamara Pierce fan, we can talk about this another time. It's okay to kind of start with this because I wouldn't
recommend it though.
I wouldn't recommend it because it sort of like loses the initial magic. But at the same time, if you just by any chance want to pick it up, it still sort of paints Tortal in a pretty good universe. It's just not the main story, but it's still a pretty good book, I'd like to think. And characters that sort of make you go, oh, and it is chronological, so at least you won't be spoiled by the time you get there.
True.
Cool. And that's my first set of 5. What's your next volley?
Okay, I'm gonna talk about 15 to 11 as well.
All right.
But, slight interruption for, ambusher appreciation. I'm gonna start with number 15, which is technically 3 books, but I'm only gonna show you the one. This is The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan.
Thanks,
the other
Kristen. 2
books in the series are The Great Hunt and The Dragon Reborn. Those are the other 2 that I've read, is what I meant. Anyway, this is an epic adult fantasy series. My friend Kristen from Merrily Kristen is the one who got me to buy them this year and read them this year, the first 3 at least. And there's also going to be a TV series. I think it's going to be on Amazon Prime, I think.
Oh, I think so, yes.
That is coming out, I want to say at the end of this year. Could be wrong about that. This is about 3 village boys, Perrin, Rand, and Matt, and they come from a small village, but their village gets attacked one night, and they basically end up involved in this quest to complete an objective that will prevent the end of the world as they know it, prevent the darkness from rising.
That's great.
They're basically the 3 people that fate has chosen to sort of weave the path of whatever the future is going to look like in this particular era.
That's cool.
And that's basically the core of the story, although things start to get more and more complicated with every book because there are more and more players coming into the game. There's more revelations about prophecies that, are important, or items that are important. And it's a really good series. I was really nervous going into it because it's a bit dense, but it's so easy to read. Like, it was not like when I read The Fellowship of the Ring for the first time where I found it so hard to get through certain sections of that. This just flowed very well. It was very entertaining. The characters are also interesting to read about, and the world is so carefully constructed. So it's fascinating to me, and I obviously ended up enjoying it so much that I kept going until I finished all the books I already had on hand, and hopefully I will get to continue the series this year. Okay, I've talked about this book a few times on this channel. It is Kingdom of the Wicked by Carrie Maniscalco.
Yeah!
Basically about twin sisters. One of the twins is murdered early on in the book, and the other twin, Emilia, is left behind, and she thinks there's something fishy about how her sister was basically murdered. And so she decides to investigate on her own, and she thinks that the Princess of Hell, who are basically demons, is involved in her sister's murder, and so she summons one of them. Turns out it's not him. They end up teaming up in this investigation, and she kind of uncovers stuff that she did not know about Hell and the Princess of Hell. and it kind of goes down from there. It's great. My favorite thing about this book is the atmosphere. It's set in the Sicilian countryside, I guess. Coastal. It's a coastal part of Sicily. It's good. Like, I just love character journeys where you really see how a character changes from who they were at the start to someone completely different by the end. And in this book, Amelia's character growth, it's super subtle, but by the time you hit the ending, you're like, huh, you would never have expected her to go where she did, but I guess if you have the right motivation, you're just gonna do what you gotta do, right?
That is correct.
After the way this ended, I just need the second book so badly, so thank goodness I only have like 10 months to wait until I can get a copy of the second book in my hands. The next book is also part of a duology. I've also talked about this one a few times on the channel. It's These Violent Delights, which is by Chloe Gong. This is basically Romeo and Juliet inspired. It is set in Shanghai in the 1920s. The entire plot centers around two former paramours having to work together in order to uncover the reason behind this sort of magical but also physical infestation that is terrorizing their entire city amidst all of the political and economic shifting that's going on as well.
That's a great
And I
summary.
love it because it's such a great blend of actual history but with like a slight fantastical element. There's a murder mystery to it. There's also like this very slow burn, like you slowly find out what happened between our two main characters, Roma and Juliet. It's just so fun. And as someone who also really enjoyed Romeo and Juliet, it was the first ever Shakespeare play I read. I have a lot of nostalgic love for it. It's fun to see all the references to it, like how she incorporated them into the story and also what she decided to change in order to make it her own. Very, very fun. Highly recommend checking out. It took me 3 years to finally read this book, okay? Even though people told me that it was gonna be a good book and I would really like it. The book in question is Wonder Woman Warbringer by Leigh Bardugo. This is the first in the DC Icons sort of series of companion novels that focused on different DC heroes.
Set in their young
sort of
adult years.
Young adult years. And this one is obviously about Diana, Wonder Woman. And in the story, she saves a girl from a shipwreck near Themyscira, but in saving her, she doesn't realize that she's pretty much changing the fate of the world because our girl in question is a warbringer.
Oh yeah.
And that is a lore that is applicable to the story where if you're a warbringer, it just so happens that you tend to usher in an age of chaos.
Yeah. You're like the confluence of terrible world-changing chaotic events.
So obviously there are people who want to kill her, there are people who want to use her, and of course our girl doesn't know what she's gonna do. Well, and so Diana, being Diana, like, is determined to like save the world.
We're gonna fight fate.
It's just their entire journey together, and you know, with allies and enemies along the way, and it's great.
Listen, it's a time-honored tradition, especially in shonen, where the only thing that the protagonist wants to do is to punch fate in the face. This does that, but with finesse and style.
Like you said, it does it with finesse and style.
Well, yeah. You know, it's not heavy-handed at all. It's Leigh Bardugo, and she's magnificent.
And it's like it's the perfect blend of like if you were watching a superhero movie, but it has a lot of humor and heart. Like she really captures that so well, and she takes. I mean, I'm sure Macky can probably see more of them than I do, but she takes a lot of the different things that are part of Diana's, like, I guess, run as Wonder Woman, like who she is and what Wonder Woman means.
There's a lot of
like,
the iconography and the lore of Diana herself that are woven into this thing, and it's pretty
so
damn
It was
cool.
funny because at first I was like, oh, it's gonna be another typical superhero story, like I'm gonna really like it, but I don't know if I'll love it, and then like somewhere in the middle I was like, wait, I was literally yelling towards the end of it because I'm like, no!
That's true, and she loves Bruce more than Diana, technically.
I do.
And yet,
I
this
still kind of love Bruce more than
exactly, and yet this one brought on the screaming. But then again, it's also Leigh Bardugo, so
it's a balance,
and it takes nothing away from Sarah J. Maas's Catwoman either.
Oh, also enjoyable. But yeah, this was. I'm glad I finally got to read it.
Good times.
And to round off, number 11, Beach Read by Emily Henry. I love this book so much. It is about two authors, Gus and January, and they're both experiencing writer's block. They happen to encounter each other because they're both sort of taking time away in order to hopefully rejuvenate like their writing so they can get their next novels done, except that they work in two different genres, and they decide that maybe it would help to jumpstart it if they make a bet and see if the other person can write in their genre. So January writes romance novels, Augustus kind of writes sort of literary fiction, specifically centered on cults. They end up trying to show each other like different examples of their genre and like encouraging the other person to write, and not only does that inspire them to pick up writing again, it also kind of unearths a lot of things that they personally have to deal with, and also has a budding relationship between the two, and it is so good. I just really enjoy the fact that there is a strong romance element in this, but it doesn't take away from the individual journeys that they each have to sort of go through to get to where they are at the end of the book. It's just such a good read. It was so delicious just like watching the relationship develop between them, and I really, really enjoyed it. You should definitely read it. it's great.
My turn. So our middle of the pack, middle 5. Ranking up number 10 would be the Boruto series, the Boruto manga. I managed to start from book 4 all the way up to, I think currently what's out is 9. We still haven't caught up on the physical copy. I think we're missing about a couple of volumes. And since I am a notorious Kindler and comiXologist, that's a word now, I just had to sort of get them all because I just sort of wanted to get caught up. We are, what, 200-ish episodes deep into Boruto, roughly about right now, and literally like 12 of them are probably canon.
True.
As far as comics and everything's filler. And again, there have been some bangers of filler ones. And the rest have been, I'm just like, come on, you guys. But that's expected, right? I mean, that's just what you do if you try to stretch a story so thin across like a long period of time. I will say that the writing shines in this one. And they are telling a completely different story. In the same way that I think Korra is a different story from Aang's story in the Avatar The Last Airbender series. And most people are hating on Boruto mostly because of what's on the screen, and I get that. But what the manga actually does is tells the actual freaking story, and it is a totally different story, and it makes the foreshadowings of the first 3 novels, which was sort of like the movie that came out, and you know what that flash forward to that terrible one-on-one battle, and then flashbacks to the present. It sets that up so well, too well in fact, that I feel it's so poignant, and every single step I take I'm like, oh, this is making those scenes so much more painful and so much more poignant. And I love that. I really love that because it's set in a world, in a universe that I absolutely adore, and with characters that have lived through, and we are now living in complete fear of them not living through, because how much luckier can you get, really? So I would recommend it for those of you who love Kishimoto's work from the actual Naruto and the Shippuden series. This is worth giving a shot. I want to give a shout out to the Sandman audiobook, because the audiobook encapsulates Preludes and Nocturne, Doll's House, and Dream Country.
So the first 3.
Roughly the first 3. So obviously James McAvoy as Dream. How can you go wrong? And Neil Gaiman apparently had a hand in choosing
who would represent
it, and including Kat Dennings, which I thought, I was like, seriously, you're going with Kat Dennings? And even Kat Dennings, when she was picked by Neil personally, she's like, are you sure? Have you heard me? And you know what? Give her a chance. Try to dissociate her from every other role she's played, and try to really absorb Neil's vision. Give it a chance. Lock onto the author's, vision of who Death is. And it's just beautiful. And for those of you who have loved The Sandman, it's just beautiful audio theater. Full of sound effects, narrations to make up for the fact that you can't see the pictures. And it gives it that other dimension. Heck, read both at the same time. That's a trick I learned from Alexa. Listen to the audio, read the darn thing. It is just such a surreal, beautiful experience. The words lift up from the page, and McAvoy disappears into Morpheus. Speaking of things that hurt, I'll just put it up here. This is the Fushigi Yugi Byakko Senki Volume 1. Now this hurts on several levels. Number 1, Iwatase had completed the Genbu Kaiden, which was the first prequel to the Fushigi Yugi series. Classic anime trope of a girl being transported to another world, and the world just happens to be in a book, and in that book there are 4 kingdoms, each with their own specific gods, and each one prophesied that if a girl from another world, ours, is ever transported there, she would have the power to summon that particular god and change the fate of the world by being able to grant 3 wishes. So the first series was awesome. She did the prequel, and this is the 3rd prequel for the other god. So first series was two of the girls, 2 of the gods. This first prequel was the 3rd god. This is the 4th, and easily my favorite. And Iwatase had a lot of, like health issues completing the first prequel. She opens this with such a painful, poignant sort of dedication to, her mom before she had passed wished she could have read this. And now it's sort of like in limbo because of COVID and everything, and there's a delay. But it still is, for me, the best love story in the entire universe. And that's why it hurts. And it's so well written, and it alludes to so many things. And even if we just get this, even if we only just got this far, I'm just glad that some of it made it out into our world. Detective Comics, Volume 5, A Lonely Place of Living. I particularly love the Detective Comics series for Batman Rebirth. Well, not Batman Rebirth. It's about the Batman
Rebirth.
It's the Rebirth universe in DC. And Volume 5 in particular, I won't spoil it too much, but it actually takes characters from Jeff Johns' Titans run, the Misfit Titans.
Oh, yeah.
Specifically the Titans of Tomorrow sort of run, where you've got a grown-up Connor and Cassie and Tim running the Justice League. It makes that world clash with the current Rebirth universe where current day Tim Drake is sort of like leading the crack team that is the start of Detective Comics. I won't go into too much detail because it's super spoiler. Obviously it's the 5th book in the series. But the fact that they're able to take what is easily one of the coolest things Jeff Johns has done with the Teen Titans and make it collide in the most insane kind of, okay, if you're gonna go timelines and if you're gonna go future meets the past, kind of Days of Future Past kind of thing, this is the way to do it. And it is just
this is the way.
Beautiful. I would suggest you read all the way up to 5 anyway, regardless, but that was one of my big reads. Which means I'm gonna end it with, to nobody's surprise, Supersons of Tomorrow.
Aww.
And it's sort of like a 1-2 punch because you do the whole thing, you see Jeff Johns' like future Titans world, you know, intersect with like the current DC universe, and then all of a sudden you have Baby John Kent, you know, the cinnamoniest role of all cinnamon in the history of DC cinnamon rolls, and you have Damian, who is the exact opposite. He's just a little imperious little brat who believes he's entitled to everything because he is both the son of the dragon and the son of the bat. So that just makes him feel like he's king of the world. And guess what? Same Jeff Johns craziness colliding again. So the fact that they sort of like come at the back of, you know, like right off the heels of each other, where you resolve the one conflict, you think it's fine, then suddenly this thing comes in and it's the same conflict again, colliding with that sort of future. Chills, goosebumps. It's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. And everything that we loved about that Jeff Johns run has echoed into the past and through John and Damian's lives. And I think it's just great because they were alluded to, well, at least Damian anyway was alluded to in the future Titans like Jeff Johns. It's like, where's Damian Wayne at that point? Why is Tim Drake in Jeff Johns' future Titans run Batman? Where is Damian? Why is Connor Superman and not John? What happened there? And a lot of that gets explored, and so it's lovely. My
next 5, we're gonna start with Fable by Adrienne Young. Fable is about Fable. Early on in the book, her father abandons her on an island of thieves and cutthroats, and she basically has to make a way for herself to survive while she's there, earn enough money to get off the island, and eventually find her father and become a part of his trading crew. When she eventually does do that, she crosses paths with a dude named West and his crew, and she gets them to take her to her dad. But then all is not as it seems with her dad and with West and his crew, and Fable sort of gets drawn into this adventure. And I love it because I'm a sucker for stories that are sort of like piracy but not quite like piracy because they're traders in this book. It's just fun for me. I like stories where the main character is traveling on a boat in the ocean. I love the dynamic of like a found family crew. Adrienne's writing is so fast-paced. Like, she's just really good at telling stories that feel very vivid and real and just compelling, and she does it in like a very small number of pages, which is refreshing considering most of the books I read are like long. I'm very excited to read the sequel for this one too, especially after how this book ends because it was wild. This book we're gonna do a little differently because this book also shows up on Macky's list later on. The book in question is The Lost Book of the White, which is by Cassandra Clare and Wesley Chu. This is the 2nd book in the Eldest Curses series. For now, I'm gonna summarize it. It takes place a little bit after the events of Tales from the Shadowhunter Academy, so you'll probably want to read that first if you don't want to end up spoiled for a few things. Old friends come to Magnus and Alec's apartment, and they come there because Magnus is holding on to a very powerful thing, and they steal it, run away with it, and so Alec and Magnus have no choice but to follow these people
and
to Shanghai to hunt them down. Unlike the previous book where it was mostly just the two of them, this one actually involves them bringing Simon and Izzy and Jason Clary with them to Shanghai in order to, you know, save the world from impending doom.
For those of you who are Shadowhunters fans who have not read this, that should roughly be enough, like, impetus for you to go, I'm gonna pick that up. But most likely, if you are a Shadowhunters fan, you've probably read this already. In which case, we'll talk about all of our feelings.
We'll talk about that later.
When we get to where we get to my spot.
The next book I'm going to mention is another romance book, and that is the Happy Ever After playlist by Abby Jimenez. Okay, this is actually the 2nd in a companion novel series. You don't necessarily have to have read the first book, but it will be spoiled for you if you read this book. The entire premise of this is that Sloane Monroe lost her fiance in a terrible accident a couple of years ago, and she's still kind of grieving him, kind of hasn't been able to get her life on track. Her entire life trajectory changes on the day that a dog ends up in her car with her through an open sunroof, literally falls into her lap. Like, she's been trying to contact the owner, can't find him, but the dog kind of grows on her, so she's kind of like happy. She's like, I'll probably just take the dog if the owner doesn't, you know, want him back. After 2 weeks, when she's officially given up, the owner actually reaches out to her, tells her that, oh, you couldn't contact me because I was out of reached. He was in New Zealand doing something for his job, and he wants the dog back. And this begins like a sort of exchange of text messages, phone calls, and stuff like that. They get to know each other. Obviously, at some point, they develop feelings for each other. It gets complicated when she finds out who this person on the other end of the line really is and what his job is in real life, because he happens to be a famous musician. And so that kind of complicates things for them. Honestly, and I mean this as the highest compliment, because I read a lot of fan fiction and I enjoy fan fiction. Like, whenever I say something reminds me of fan fiction, I mean that in the best way, because it inspires the same level of feelings. And like, as someone who used to read boy fan fiction, this was like something like that, but a more adult and like well-written version. It's just so good. And like, I love that, again, it's one of those stories where the romance is a big factor, but it's not the only thing going on in this story. Sloane has a lot of baggage she needs to deal with. Jason has a lot of baggage he needs to deal with. And it's refreshing that they both get the chance to do that in the story together and apart. And that's a really nice thing about it. Plus, it's just nice to read about a guy who is really just that decent. He's like a good guy. I really enjoyed it. The next series that I want to mention actually has 13 books as of the end of 2020, but I only read the 12 books in the series. And that's the Guild Hunter series by Nalini Singh. I've talked about this multiple times on the channel. You guys know that I love the series the entire time I was reading it. The premise of the first book is basically that the Archangel of New York, Raphael, hires a guild hunter who's basically a mortal that's specially trained to fight vampires. And he hires Elena to basically assist him in capturing someone super powerful that has gone rogue. The series is so great because the first book itself is already such a good story. At the end of it, I was kind of like, okay, so where are we gonna go from here? And it's been 13 books, and it's still so impressive to me that she's managed to like write each individual story, so that's a good read on its own, but there's like this overarching plots actually, that extend from like the first book all the way to the 12th, or the first book all the way to the 13th, and it's just there. Like, you might not even notice, but it was seeded the entire time, and then when it reveals itself, you're like, ah. It's great. It's brought me a lot of highs and lows, because there are a lot of
I can
sort of
attest to
emotional
that.
roller coaster
That
parts of these
happens.
stories, and they're just such quick reads, so enjoyable, so much fun. Definitely would recommend checking out the series if you're interested in an adult urban fantasy romance type deal, especially because it has angels and vampires in it. Interesting combination, honestly.
As a Magic the Gathering fan, I approve.
But speaking of emotional roller coasters, I think Macky alluded to it a little bit ago when he said that I had sort of been convincing him to like listen to an audiobook and read something. I honestly can't take full credit for that idea, because my friend Hannah is the one who told me to do it for the series, and I'm so glad she did, because it really enhanced that reading experience for me. I don't think it would have quite affected me the same way if I'd only read the books. I would have enjoyed them, but I don't think I would have like felt the
full
punch,
sensory like
felt the punch of them
assault
without
of
it.
visually and
And
audibly.
the series I'm going to be talking about is the Illuminae files. They're pretty hefty. So let's start with Illuminae. That's the first book. Gemina is the second book, my favorite in the series, also Macky's favorite, and Obsidio. These books are so good. They are sci-fi series, a young adult sci-fi series. It actually is all tied together by the fact that there is this big evil corporation, and the characters in this series want to take down this corporation.
Yeah.
And so it's a dossier of information, interviews, chats, and there are different things going on in each book. So in this one, a planet has just been decimated, basically, and there are survivors escaping on ships, except that someone is also messing with their survival plan.
Like, exactly, because they want to eliminate all sort of evidence of any kind of
they're basically trying to
foul
erase, wipe everything off so that nobody knows.
And their goal is to get to a space station to safety.
Yes. In this second book, it's set at the space station.
At the freaking space
that
station
they're trying
that
to
the
get
people
to.
here are trying
and
to
what
get
happens
to.
in this one is someone tries to take over the space station. Again, to eliminate
any kind of
possibility that they will
play.
know that something happened on this planet.
So it's almost kind of like these two overlap in terms of like timeline.
Yes, a little bit.
Because they're heading over to the space station and stuff at the space station is sort of happening already. So.
And then this third book is the one that takes place after the
After
first
these two
two.
books.
It takes place on the planet that was decimated, because there are still some people who are alive over there, imprisoned by the evil corporation, and the evil corporation is still trying to do this big cleanup job.
I did not know that. That's so cool. Okay.
The series is fascinating
I
in format, and I
read it.
think it makes for such an interesting visual reading experience, but it also makes for such an interesting audio experience because of the way they adapt it. You get the sound effects, the voices, like it sounds very specific to certain things in the books. And I love that these authors were able to so creatively tell a complete story with these different media formats. Like, that is a very difficult task, and to get readers like myself and Macky to like feel very deeply for the characters in the book and to feel so connected to them,
they're so good,
even without actually just using like, you know, normal prose to tell the story. I think that's a really impressive accomplishment. I'm so glad I finally read the series. Like, I genuinely would have felt so bad to miss out on such an epic sci-fi experience. Like, I don't read a lot of sci-fi in general.
Yeah.
And the fact that I read all 3 of these books this year,
pretty quickly,
listen to them,
mind you, and listen through them, and
that's
not a small feat.
And
That's not a small
listen
feed.
to them at normal speed, because I normally would like speed it up a little bit. This is like the
crazy.
one time where I was like, I'm willing to listen to 20+ hours of this book because it sounds so good.
And it was,
It
and
was.
it still is.
It's just such an epic adventure. The characters, I love them so much. Like, it's great. Like, there is enough space shenanigans in it to suit my tastes.
Enough real characters.
And
They're 3-dimensional. They're fully formed. They have and they're
all
fascinating
very different
and lovely
from each other too, which I love.
Which means when you pit them against each other or throw them in the same pile, oh boy,
It's
what a great
so
thing.
epic, and I love it so much. So, highly recommend that.
Power of collaboration.
Yeah, now we gotta wait for Macky to read Obsidio.
2021. Alrighty, it's now time for the top 5. That's right, the top 5 books from myself and Alexa finally got here. I'm gonna kick things off with the Old Guard series. Netflix came out with a movie, Old Guard, which starred Charlize Theron and a bunch of others. Super, super fun movie, and really got me in the place where I needed the kind of immortal stories, and by immortal stories I mean stories about immortals.
Immortal stories.
Sure, vampires count, and I guess werewolves to a point if that's how that lore is, but I come from an era where Highlander was a thing. For those of you, no, just me then, Tyler, Duncan, McLeod, Quentin, Connor. No? Okay, anyway, Old Guard centers around a group of immortals. They've been around for a while. They don't know how or why they are immortal. They only know just from experience that at any point in time, one of them could awaken and they will know where that person is. It doesn't always happen, but it has. It's set at a time where they've decided, you know, to continue their time-honored tradition of just being mercenaries for good. Just sort of literally blending into the shadows so that nobody, like, would ever know that they exist, could exploit them, could whatever, but at the same time doing good. So they're warriors, they're powerful, they're amazing, until they are betrayed by one of their sort of contacts, which leads them to go, okay, who's messing with us and what is going on? It explores sort of like their rich history. It sort of cuts back and forth between their past and what's going on in the present. And to make things even more complicated, a new one awakens. An American soldier who, you know, was killed in battle in Afghanistan, and she just wakes up. And she's like, what the heck's going on? And so they're like, all right. Charlize Theron's character goes, you guys figure out what the hell's going on with here. I'll go get the kid. It's just so great. And so you get that whole, we've got the weight of the world. You've got that, this is new to me. It's just this yummy sort of mix of everything. And the first graphic novel is basically the story of the first movie. Okay. I hear the second movie is in production. I don't know how far. But it's new. All of this just literally just came out in the last couple of years, with the second book just finishing in 2020. Literally. So I'm just like, I need more of it. And so it's super cool. Definitely ranking amongst my top 5. Let's revisit The Lost Book of the Wife.
Oh, we're back.
If you're a Shadowhunters fan, chances are you've read this already. If you're not, why wouldn't you want to read a book that has OG Hell Crew?
I mean, that is what they are.
I mean, the things that they bring to Hell are probably questionable, but the fact that they also bring their A-game means why wouldn't we want to see them take on the possible end of the world again? They are literally old hands at, oh shoot, the world's ending, alright, we've done that before. So, but
do it again.
With Magnus and Alec at the center this time, and not Jason Clary. Which to me is so refreshing. I was expecting, alright, I guess take the other kids, and I'm like, oh wait, they're not kids anymore at this point in time.
They're adults now.
Grown-ups. And my last piece, and Lex, you can give your thoughts, it is so refreshing to see these kids grown up. Because absolutely everything that did not sit too well with me reading these characters have gone magnificently away just because they're adults about life and everything. I mean, they're still the same people at the core, which is cool, and I had nothing against that. It's just everything else that they did outside of that, I'm just like, really? This kind of energy again? But they don't have that. The fact that I enjoyed this more than the Red Scrolls of Magic, even if objectively Red Scrolls of Magic had the better villain, had the tighter story, had a better plot, I would like to even think. But the fact that I enjoyed this more just is like super subjective. But that's what this entire vlog is about. We loved it. I loved it. Alexa loved Red Scrolls more, but there are some things that you did love about this thing, which are...
there are some things I did love about this one. I like to call this book the Shadowhunter Shenanigans in Shanghai book, because that's what it basically is. The things I liked about it, I love that we're in Shanghai. Introduces us to a whole new part of the Shadowhunters world, which is always a fascinating
And
thing.
we know what the Shanghai Institute is.
Yes,
for those
exactly.
of you who've read the books.
I love well, we already mentioned some of the OG crew appears. There is also another character that shows up in Shanghai that I am happy to see all the time.
Love so much.
I also really like the humor in this book. There's like so
Humor's good.
many moments where I'm just like, it was just spot on delivery. Like, I don't know, it was like the timing of when something would happen, or like someone just says something really witty or smart, and I just enjoyed that tremendously. And you know what? At the end of the day, it was a fun story to read. Like, it was just a fun romp. It was wild at certain points.
Wild. Pretty
so wild. But it was so great. And plus, the highlight of this book, and the series really in general, is just that it's about Magnus and Alec. And we get to see them, again, in a different part of their romantic history timeline. They're both adults, and they're both sure about their relationship now. And they're starting to have other commitments in their life.
That's
wow, I'm not spoiling it!
Yeah.
If you know, you know!
That's true. If you know,
So
you
they
know.
have other commitments in their lives now, and it's just nice because in this book they both want so badly to protect each other and to be there for each other, and they're willing to sacrifice themselves in pursuit of that, and they actually have to acknowledge that at some point in this book. Like, that is gonna be the thing, you know?
All right. I will say this. The fact that all Shadowhunters have this, we're all gonna, Shadowhunters die young kind of thing. The way it intersects with the tenderness. Like, Alec is certain he will not blink an eyelash if he knew that his life meant the safety of the world. But to have Magnus come to the forefront of that and have his own heroism right next to Alec's, in my head I'm just like, this is so poignant. This is kind of really cool. So, what else can we say?
House of Light with Bane.
House of Light with Bane right here. Moving along really quick, because I've said so much about this. There isn't really that many things else I want to say, because if you know, you know. If you don't, then we don't. This is not the
This is
place
not
to,
for
like,
you.
to put it. It's the Animorphs graphic novel. The only thing I can say is that for those of you who love the original series, this is more than just an homage. This is not even a reboot so much as it is a remake. Unlike most remakes where you sort of tweak this and tweak that, no, this is actually a faithful illustration of all of the events that happened in book one, which I assume will be a precedent for all of the other 50 sort of like volumes that are going to come up. You know, the art is for, middle grade readers. Certainly not bad. Not necessarily my cup of tea, I would like to say. But you sort of get over that really quickly because the story still sort of slaps. This is such a great opening, and it pulls no punches. It is easily one of the darkest middle grade franchises, I want to say, ever in the history of ever. And that a new generation of readers get a chance to sort of, come into this world and to see it illustrated is, to me, sort of just absolutely phenomenal. So I highly recommend it to anybody. In which case, if you've never read the Animorphs before, pick this book up, and may that lead you to all the other 53 books right afterwards. We're gonna go to number 2 and sort of stop there because I have been talking about this series all frickin' year. It is the Jonathan Hickman run of X-Men, starting with House and Powers of X, all the way up to Dawn of X. And just recently I read the first, because Marvel Unlimited has it, the first issue of X of Swords. It puts the mutants that we have known and loved in the X-Men franchise on the front foot this time because of some magical, crazy mutant juju, allowed them to rewrite actual history, as is their wont, to the point where they now have their own island, which is Krakoa. It is an island nation. They created all of these special medicines and stuff to sort of dangle in front of the world, saying, tell you what, we can cure Alzheimer's and cancer and sell them to you at a lovely rate. Under these two conditions, you consider us a legitimate world power and you treat us like a sovereign nation, with all of the rights of any actual sovereign nation, which obviously the bigots are just like, we're still gonna shank you in the dark, and everyone's just like, give me the cure to Alzheimer's, please. And they are 100% unapologetic, and every single mutant ever that is marginally sane enough to go, all right, this is my new home now, now lives on the island.
Yeah.
I mean, you have Apocalypse on this island. That's literally how this starts out. Apocalypse, Magneto, and Charles Xavier on the same side for the first time in literally ever. That alone should make you want to go pick this up. So at the end of the day, watch the other videos. I say, like every other What We Read that Alexa and I have done in the What We Read series for 2020 has some form of the X-Men books in there. Grab House of X and Powers of X. If you are an X-Men fan and you have not touched this thing, give it a shot. As usual, the fandoms will always be divided about new stuff.
Yeah, I think so. That's natural.
But this fan, I have not had this much stake in the X-Men universe since, I want to say, Joss Whedon's astonishing X-Men run.
All right, yes.
Which is still good. Which is still good because just the dialogue is just fire and whatever. The Utopia arc, where they actually did try, go figure, I like it when they try to have their own island. I did not enjoy Genosha that much, but I did enjoy Utopia, where they decided to, off the coast of San Francisco, we're gonna start living here now. And they fought the Dark Avengers away, which is super awesome. That was great. That was the aftermath of Secret Invasion. And sort of everything else in between, I was kind of like, well, I don't know. Every time they're living in the mansion, I'm just like, meh. But the minute they're like, we're gonna strike out on our own, beautiful. I've never been this happy reading the X-Men in my entire life.
True, you really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it makes me so happy, I forget that I have to forgive the movies. Not that they're bad, not hating on them, because you can love the movies all you want. It just wasn't my thing, and they rubbed me the wrong way, and that's just my opinion. But it makes me so happy that I don't care that the movies like did what they did. That's how good it is to me. So there's that. I'm gonna stop at number 2 because we do want to focus on number 1.
We'll wait for number 1 later.
Yeah. In which case, Lex, you're
now
up.
my turn. Okay. I talked about this series in last year's Best Books, and it's going to make an appearance in this year's
Once
Best
again.
Books as
Gee,
well.
I wonder what it could be.
Keeper of the Lost Cities.
There
as
we go.
usual, except that I'm skipping an entire book because it doesn't deserve to be here.
Yeah, we're not gonna put that in
So
there.
I'm going to mention Nightfall. Then we're going to skip the book that came next. We'll just pretend
That book was
that
the
we
filler.
went straight into Legacy. And
oh
this
boy.
year, Unlocked came out, which is actually a novella, not a full novel.
Which is also arguably the book that made Alexis scream and rant more.
No. This still has
Arguably.
earned the spot
Arguably.
for the biggest emotional response.
Oh, biggest emotional response, yes.
That the series has
but in
given
terms
me.
of like how many times...
I don't even know what else I need to say about the Keeper of the Lost Cities series at this point. You guys already know it's about a young girl named Sophie Foster. In the first book, she discovers that there is a whole hidden world of elves.
Which she is a part of.
Of which she happens to be a part of, except that she was brought up in the human world for very specific reasons, because she was actually an experiment by an organization called the Black Swan.
That makes her a pivotal piece to the big world events that are going to unfold as the books go along.
I mean, the series continues to be epic, it continues to be fun, we get to spend time with all these characters we love in a world that is still as interesting and fascinating as it always is. I love that there's really no clear... There are actions that are clearly black and white, like they're bad. But then, at the same time, there are these different factions. They're all fighting to get towards the same thing. They're just using different methods to get there. And the conflict between that, and even between the individual like approaches to things, makes everything so interesting because you're really forced to think like, who's making the right choice? Who's doing it the right way?
That's right.
Is there a better way to approach something? And it's just so fascinating. It's just interesting to see how Sophie is handling everything that gets thrown at her, how much more of her family and friends will be, like how many more of them will end up involved in this big chaotic conflict, and like how much of their world is going to be shifted, traumatized, changed by all of these new and shocking things that are being, you know, unearthed. I obviously love the series a lot because of the story, but I also love it for the characters.
There you go. That's why you gotta read it.
I really love the characters in these books. My favorite character is Keith, which we all know that. And
to nobody's surprise.
he is arguably one of the most pivotal characters in this entire story.
Oh yeah.
Surprisingly more so than I expected him to be, considering who he was in the first book.
He didn't expect to be such a pivotal force. He was just gonna be the wisecracking quote-unquote sidekick-ish person on the sidelines.
Yeah.
Not so much
Not so
anymore.
much. He is now an equal player on this board, and like he also will affect the state of the world at the end of all this.
And I'm willing to make a bold prediction that he is actually going to play a bigger role than Sophie. So if you like conspiracies, if you like, you know, like me and my friends will save the world, that's probably the only reason I'm still reading this.
I also think like she's really good at making them funny. There's such funny moments in there.
Yeah, because the humor and the culture are so close to what our own humor and culture is in the real world. So I'm just like, this is almost kind of like really cool that you get it gets, and it's so meta. My God, this entire series is so frigging meta.
It really is.
It's great.
For all that I did not include it, you have to read Flashback to get to the legacy. Like it's just
or Wikipedia. I don't know. That's
no,
not fair.
don't
That's
do
not
that.
fair.
Nope,
Don't
nope,
do that.
nope,
Don't
nope.
do that.
There are some good moments in it. I will say
true.
that.
Totally worth it. Totally
There's
worth
just some other stuff that I don't like.
I mean, the fact that I didn't put it on my top 15, but I'm just like, it's really that good.
The series itself as a whole is great.
And read it with a friend.
Yeah, it's much more fun.
It's so fun. It's so fun to see them. Read it ahead and then see the friend react the same way.
So the next thing that I'm going to talk about is a trilogy. I actually am mentioning the first book even though I read it, and it was on the list the year that I read it. It's the Shadow of the Fox trilogy by Julie Kagawa. So Shadow of the Fox, Soul of the Sword, and the conclusion, Night of the Dragon, which came out this year. I've talked about this series before, but as a refresher, it is basically like an anime in a book form. It's about a half-kitsune named Yumeko, and she is tasked with protecting this particular scroll that if all the pieces of the scroll come together, you can technically summon this powerful dragon and make a wish. There are people after the scroll, including a warrior from the Shadow Clan who wants the scroll for his own reasons. It reminds me a lot of my favorite shoujo fantasy animes.
Yeah, it's got that.
Like, it's got the whole, like,
girl.
there's like a journey to it, there's like a magical girl to it, there's like different ninjas and fighting to it, there's a lot of Japanese folklore woven into it, and it's so much fun. Macky was with me when I read, I think, the second and the third book, and I was just like hysterically sobbing by the third book because that's how emotionally attached I had gotten to all of these schmucks. She didn't hold back on the punches in this story, and the ending fits it perfectly. So whether or not you're an anime fan, you should definitely read this series because it's a fun YA fantasy series, but it will probably mean more to you if you are an anime fan because it has a lot of things that you will recognize.
And the hallmarks are just all well, like, incorporated.
You will absolutely see that coming. So the next book, I'm just going to summarize it again because this is actually a spoiler for what Macky's number 1 is. It's number 3 on my list.
To nobody's surprise.
Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare, the first in the Last Hour series. This is a series that takes place after the Infernal Devices, so this is the next generation after that, at a time of relative peace for the Shadowhunters as well. 2 people come back to town. We have Tatiana Blackthorn and her ward Grace, and Cordelia Carstairs as her mother and her brother Alistair.
And with the coming home to London of these 2 clans, a series of events are triggered that, you know, are interwoven with the lives of our favorites, who happen to be the next generation children.
We'll talk a little bit more about this later because feelings, right? Number 2 could not have gone to any other book, but House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. This is the first book in her Crescent City series. It's also an adult sort of urban fantasy series, except that it's set in a real fantasy world, not anywhere we actually know. It basically centers on a main character named Bryce. She's still grieving the death of her best friend. She teams up with an angel in this book in order to investigate her friend's murder after new evidence is uncovered, and so she kind of has to unravel the mystery with him. So it has some of my favorite things already. Like, I am a sucker for a fantasy murder mystery type story. Like, I just love those. I also have been a big fan of Sarah's from the beginning, so her writing and the way she, like, brings her worlds to life, brings her characters to life, tells her stories, has always worked really well for me, and that is no different in this series. Like, there's a whole new cast of people to love. There's a whole new world with so many fascinating, like, new things that I'm just like, there's so much possibility for so many stories in this world, and I'm just excited and eager for all of them. I can definitely tell you that I cried reading this book because I remember getting to, like, sort of the latter third of it, and I was just like sobbing my eyes out because there's such a visceral character journey that Bryce goes on in this story, because she is grieving and she's having a hard time with a lot of things, and she's grappling with that sort of darkness in her as the book progresses, even while she's, you know, she has to revisit all of these things about her best friend who she lost. Her best friend is basically like her sister. Yeah. And so she's grappling with all of this on top of also grappling with other personal things that get revealed as the book goes on. And I'm just like watching this character journey play. It was so epic and so good, and I'm like so excited for the sequel, like ridiculously excited. So number 2. I'm gonna make the executive decision to talk about my number 1 first before we get to Macky's, because I feel like we'll have to talk a little bit more about that since we're both sharing our thoughts on it.
Yep.
So I'm gonna talk about my number 1 book for 2020. It was kind of an easy pick for me, honestly, after I'd read it, because everything about this book was just incredible. And that book is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This is a standalone fantasy story about a young woman named Addie LaRue. She is alive in 1700s France, and she does not want to be married. On the day that she's supposed to get married, she goes to the forest to, you know, petition the gods for her own freedom, except that she times it incorrectly, so she ends up petitioning someone who comes out after dark, aka the devil in this story. So cool. He makes a deal with her. She can have her freedom, she'll basically be immortal, and she can do everything that her heart desires, except that after someone leaves her presence, they won't remember who she is. Cut to like 300 years later, and she's in New York City. She walks into a bookstore, meets a guy, right? Leaves the bookstore. When she comes back, the guy actually remembers who she is. And that sparks a whole series of events. I know that Victoria Schwab has been working on this novel for years, and I can understand why she had to, because it requires putting together so many pieces of this puzzle.
It sounds like a difficult story to tell.
It is, because you are trying to capture Addie in the book, but also give the sense to the reader that you don't actually really know Addie either.
That's great.
You're seeing her through the lens of someone else's perspective, not so much her own. So you can't really know her, and you're only knowing what someone has been able to capture of her.
That's
So
great.
that's one. The fantastical element with the devil and her relationship with him over the years is also interesting because she changes perspectives on it from where she was at the beginning when she originally made that deal to where she's at the end of this book. It's so good. It's like there's a love story in there, but there's also this epic, like, I'm not gonna give in to you. It's basically like a big middle finger to the devil in this story.
There's an element of defiance.
And then there's also like the natural ebb and flow of someone's life, which she experiences over and over and over again every time she has to resettle in a different place or, you know, make her way with different people. Like there's also the fact that she has to fight to survive in a world that wouldn't remember her. Like how is she supposed to do anything? Like it's not easy. If you were immortal and this whole like people forget you clause didn't apply, you wouldn't have such a hard time. It would be fine, right?
Yeah.
But like, how do you amass property, amass money? Like how do you make lasting relationships? You can't. And so it just provides this whole weird contradiction of things. Like it's so good. Like there's no way to explain it except to tell you guys that you need to experience it, because that's what this book is. It is an experience. It is my favorite of her work that I have read so far. And I definitely would revisit this story again just to see it all play out now that I know how it ends. Definitely pick up this book. Alright, we're gonna take a moment now to go back to talking about Chain of Gold.
To nobody's surprise.
I'll go first, since I probably have a little less thoughts here. Again, the reason that this book hit my top 3 is because, first of all, I love the Shadowhunters universe, and I always find it fascinating when we are introduced to a new aspect or era of it, and that's what happens in this book. As someone who loves historical romance and who has read her fair share of it, that's the era that we're in with this story, and I enjoyed it tremendously. It has all the hallmarks of that era because they are living in a time of relative peace, sort of. So some of the things that they do, like get together for tea or get together for a picnic, or like those are things
or talk
that you
about
see.
Betrothals.
Oh my gosh, yes. Absolutely, yes. But again, the highlight of this particular book, much like Lost Book of the White, is the characters. It is the cast of characters in this book that like made it supersede Lost Book of the White for me, even though I love Magnus Bane and Alec Lightwood to death. The new characters, who not so new if you've read some of the short story collections, but
yeah, because that's when you first see like a couple of these characters.
Pretty much all of the main players in that story, you get to see them in those stories. Just, I love them so much. I want to protect them so much, and like watching them make dumb choices. I mean, I'm willing to do that because I care about them so damn much.
Shadowhunter blood breeds true.
Very true. For me personally, that's what I love the most about Chain of Gold. It's just got great character work, and I will follow these schmucks even if they make dumb choices to the end of the earth.
We owe it to them. One of the things that I told Alexa just before Chain of Gold came out, these kids are gonna murder us. And they did.
Yep. Actually,
as predicted.
Before Macky goes on, we actually have a full episode just about this book, so you can have more of our feelings by checking that out.
By checking that out. So Fandom Buzz is its own thing. There's a link there. We have a bookish breakdown. In fact, we started bookish breakdown
because of this book.
Because of this book,
like we created breakdown.
Because the book broke us down, and I hope it does for you too. For me, there's just some. I follow generations. That's my thing. I love the concept of clans and family and it sort
legacy.
That's a good word. That's a great word, babe. Legacy is a
keeper.
Oh, it's beautiful. Legacy is a thing that I love, and when legacies are done right, or even being fought to be preserved, or are done wrong, and then are being and the characters are trying to right the legacy and set it to rights rather. To have that very, very alive and present here, to see the children of the people that you have come to appreciate and then love them more. We're just talking about love today and how there's always that illogical, unexplainable, you really just can't put it into words part where your intuition and your feelings live. Mm-hmm. That words might even cheapen the expression of. That's just how much Alexa and I have loved these characters and how much their struggles mean to us. The journeys that they're on. And you know me, I don't care for Herondales much. But
you don't care for most Herondales. How about that?
I don't care for most Herondales.
There are exceptions.
And I didn't even care for Lightwoods when this whole thing started out. But then when these kids take front row and center of the stage of Shadowhunter life in London, I just can't help but be fixated and fascinated. If you're a Shadowhunters fan and you haven't read this, I think you should. But if you're a Shadowhunters fan, you haven't read The Infernal Devices, you're gonna have to start there though, because
yeah,
then...
this book actually works best because it bears the legacy of all the books that came before it.
Exactly. So that's the other caveat about this book. It's objectively a
You could technically read it without reading all the other books, sure.
But the gravity that knowing what
and the
everything
depth
else
of your feelings for it, if you've read everything and enjoyed it,
it's just it'll have
hit you.
It'll have the weight of the full timeline.
Yep.
I want to say, which is I think the experience that Alexa and I have with this book. That's the beauty of series that you don't get with like one-shot books. When you
That's the
read
beauty of series universes.
There you go. It's like when you have the weight of, and that's why we all loved Avengers Endgame, because it bore the weight of
everything
emotionally
that came before it.
Everything that came before it, or even stuff like in this case, this is a prequel, but all the ripples that it sends into the present, and all of the things in the present that sort of allude to it in the past, and you sort of like stick that together and go, oh, that's another good golden connection right there. It's just beautiful. So needless to say, Chain of Iron is going to destroy us anew.
For sure.
But until
Don't
then,
doubt it.
until then, pick this up if you haven't, and if you haven't done Infernal, do Infernal. It's great stuff.
Everything is great, really. Well, that's not true. I take that back. I mean, there are some books that I don't love as much.
But you gotta read them. You gotta read them because every
at
book,
least once.
Yeah, because every book in chronological publishing order,
it gives something,
bears the weight of the full timeline,
Yep.
and that is an experience that apparently only so few writers can say that they can give their audience, and Cassandra Clare has that in spades.
Yep. Before we end this video, we're gonna have a brief segment where Macky will do some special mentions for books that he's read, just to balance it out, because I'm actually going to be talking about a couple of 2021 books that I read in 2020 that I wanted to give a shout out to. One of Macky's special mentions is actually on that list as well, so we'll save that for last.
And you do the usual thing.
So you get to go first. I think I have no idea what's on the special mentions list. I would hate to presume.
Well, here we go. All right, so I'm gonna start with Buffy the Vampire Slayer: Chosen Ones. It's the new kind, the ones that when Boom had taken the franchise, and it features a Filipino Slayer. So many thoughts on the Filipino Slayer's name. We'll save that for some other conversation. But with the exception of that, the fact that they were able to take a Slayer and put them in the Philippines. Of all countries, that's kind of cool. I
like that they really went
as a Filipino, and it's not even so much just the representation as it is, which is always cool.
Yeah, of course.
But for me, more than just that, it's like, oh, you picked that lore, and seriously, you did. It kind of really fits because we do have our own sort of set of vampires and whatever, and in the essence of sort of what Buffy is, where the obvious problem isn't necessarily obviously the problem. You've got a really good twist in there, and it's just that one issue. The Chosen One sort of series is like different Slayers at different times, but it takes that trope of you think the witch is the actual one who's eating the people in the village.
But she's not.
I mean, I'm not saying.
Don't spoil it.
I'm not saying she hasn't, but I'm not saying she is either. So that ambiguity.
I have so many questions.
And so that delicious ambiguity that eventually gets untangled. That's how gray the world is. Of all of the things that I've read so far, that's the only one that I'm just like, this is nice. I like that one. So special mention of that. And speaking of Slayers, the Witcher comics, I think the Witcher graphic novels.
Yeah.
So
you
Witcher
too. I forgot about that.
Yeah, Witcher had made a huge splash with Henry Cavill last year because of Netflix.
Because I'm terrible at series.
It's great. It's a great series, and for the graphic novels to actually be such a great addition to the lore, because there's untold stories, and they're not in such a way where it feels like a diversion from canon. And they don't even say it's canon, but it all just gels well together. You just
That's nice. That's
lob
also
them
nice.
together.
See, universe story.
Yeah, it's a universe story, and it's just so great, and it keeps in tradition of Witcher lore, which is who is the real monster here. So again, very close to the Buffy kind of like, a piece of, you think the monster is the monster, but actually the humans are the worst of the monsters, right? So and Witcher has that up in spades, and this particularly new one just goes to show you people suck. That's the whole. People suck. Bottom line, people suck, and you're gonna have to shank something or someone.
I was about to say.
You can start with it, but for heaven's sake, play the video game or just watch the Netflix series first. Then you can watch the graphic films. Special mention to X-Men/Fantastic Four.
Oh, I remember that.
It is again in the Krakoa run, and the X-Men have their own country. It's a cute crossover because Sue and Reed Richards' son, Franklin Richards, is technically a mutant. So his place in the mutant world is sort of like in question, and the fact that he gets to sort of revisit a sort of like a friend from his childhood in Kitty Pryde, who was sort of like a very big sister format. And Kitty has moved up in the world. She is now the Red Queen of the Hellfire Club or passes for the Hellfire Club in the Krakoa like sort of like setting. And Kitty just basically goes, my loyalty is to Franklin. And to me that was just great to see how that played out. It's sure she has loyalty to Krakoa as her nation, but she's like, but Franklin is still a mutant, he's one of us, and more importantly, he's my friend. If you like big sisters and, you know, and big sister stories, this is a pretty good one. So this is lore by
We'll
Alexander
do sort of
Bradford.
what we did earlier,
We'll
summarize it for
because
now.
this is a 2021 book. It hasn't come out, and we were graced by an arc.
By the time you'll see this video, it's probably out.
It'll be out by then. It takes place in the present day with a young woman named Melora, right? Who has all her life has tried to escape the terrible tragedy that has befallen her particular family, because her family is just but one of many families given unction by the god Zeus to hunt down renegade gods who
during a tournament
that happens every 7 years. As punishment for those gods, they are to be hunted, and if killed, whoever kills them gets to assume their godly immortality and powers, thus bringing riches and untold economic and political advantages to the particular clan of the victor, basically, of that particular Aegon is what it's called. Melora was a victim of terrible circumstances in the last Aegon. She has spent years running away from it until such time that people from her childhood that she had thought dead come rocketing back into her life to everybody's surprise. And to make matters worse, she finds one of the gods bleeding and broken on her doorstep, and she is like, I am back and did not intend it to be. So we'll save our thoughts on that because this is a 2021 read, but it's definitely part of my top 3. I am going to skip my top 2 because we talked about the Keeper of the Legacy series.
I mean, we could just show it
already. I will only say this. Buy the Barnes & Noble edition, because the Barnes & Noble edition has art, and I'm just going to show the art because this is, for those of you who have read it, this is the art. I will not spoil what this art is, where it comes from, and what the context is.
Yeah.
But I have said it before and I've said it again, this is so meta.
In the best way.
In the best way possible. And even though Unlock is a novella and basically like a world building guide or a world guide to the thing, there is enough in here to make anybody scream for the hills in a good way. And so that's why that's there. Super special mention. In which case, my top, which I already mentioned that I've read this, but I do want to really focus on one particular Sandman chapter.
Right.
It is a chapter, which most likely came out as a one comic issue, sort of one shot, and it is called The Sound of Her Wings. And that is the first time we ever encounter Death, who is my favorite character in the Sandman series.
Sure.
Not only is it lovely to read in graphic novel format, but it is also magnificent the way James McAvoy and Kat Dennings actually play off each other as, you know, siblings, Death and Dream. Again, as you already know my thoughts about Kat Dennings. You know Kat Dennings' thoughts on Kat Dennings. Give Gaiman a chance and enjoy this little thing. Anyway, on that note, 2021
All right, well, I'm gonna skip that first. I'm gonna dial it back. There's a 2020 book that I meant to reread in 2020 because I read it so early that I read it like almost a year before it came out. The book in question is Where Dreams Descend by Janella Angeles. It's basically Moulin Rouge inspired and Phantom of the Opera inspired. It is about a female magician named Kalia. She is a performer at this Hellfire house, and one day she basically gets to go from the house to a city because she wants to participate in a competition for magicians, except that they don't want her to join in because she's a female magician. And when you're a female magician, you're technically supposed to only do certain tasks or do certain things. But Kalia is very powerful and she sort of makes her way into the competition. But then one by one, her competition, I keep saying the word competition, keeps getting eliminated and they have to figure out who's doing it. So lots of twists and turns. Very excited because the sequel is out this year. Can't wait to read it. There is a YA contemporary called You Have a Match by Emma Lord that comes out in January. This one is basically like a Parent Trap situation. So there's this girl, she ends up doing one of those like online, you know, genetics testing things where you can sort of like know how much % of any race you are. Yeah. And it also kind of links you up to other people who have taken the test who share your DNA. The test informs her that she actually has a full-blooded sister that she did not know about. What? And these two end up meeting and they're trying to figure out what went down between their parents and why they didn't know about each other until now. And it all also primarily takes place at a summer camp setting. Hence the Parent Trap reference. And it is delightful, it's funny, it's charming, and it has all the hallmarks of an Emma Lord book. Apparently. I've read 2 now and I can see all of that. And I really enjoyed it. It definitely made me emotional. Plus, the main guy in it happens to be Filipino, which is cool.
Oh, cool.
So that was always a fun like element to add to it. The next 2 books I'm going to talk about are both adult contemporary romance novels, and they both happen to be about coworkers. So first is Shipped, which is about 2 coworkers who are competing for a promotion. They are sent by their boss on one of their company's cruises so that they can gather some intel, create a presentation, and once they present to him, he will decide who gets this promotion. And the female coworker has always been under the impression that the guy is kind of a jerk, he's kind of full of himself, he's encroaching on her, like he's making it harder for her to do her job. And she works her butt off to be good at her job, basically. And she's proven herself over and over again, right? But when they finally meet in person, she kind of discovers that maybe what she thought wasn't actually what he's like, and, you know, sparks fly there. The other book is The X Talk by Rachel Lynn Solomon. This book is set at a public radio station. There are 2 individuals who work there who are sort of rivals. They kind of butt heads all the time because the guy is a very serious journalist and he just happens to encroach on her space because the girl just loves radio and radio shows. One day, because they need to figure out a sort of contingency plan to sort of bring in more money for the station, she ends up suggesting an idea for a show called The X Talk, where 2 exes are gonna get together, talk about their relationship, bring in some experts, talk about that stuff. And their boss decides that the best way to do this is to get those 2 rivals who have never dated to pretend that they did, pretend they're exes, and host the X Talk because they just have that winning dynamic between them. And things kind of spiral out of control when they get to know each other and realize that, you know, they might actually like each other. Obviously, there's a whole they lied to the entire public that has been listening to the show, so kind of gets a little squicky for them, but it's so enjoyable, so fun. It just has so much heart to it, so much humor. The relationship dynamic in both those books, actually, it's very well done because it's just like miscommunications, misconceptions, and I kind of love the way that unfolded in both those stories. I also like the sort of workplace aspect to them. Definitely enjoyed that. The last book I'm going to mention that I don't actually have on me is because I lent the arc that I had to Rachel, but it is The Mask Falling. That is the 4th book in the Bone Season series, and it was an emotional roller coaster. I read it a month ago and I'm still not over it. It's another chapter in Paige Mahoney's story. It takes place in Paris. It basically builds on the events of the first 3 books and the novellas that came before, where this is set in a world where Scion is the government that is sort of in control of England, London in particular, and also in Paris. And they are basically cracking down on clairvoyance. So people who possess any sort of psychic abilities. And Paige happens to be part of sort of like the London underground, and she is determined to sort of fight against this government that is, you know, threatening people like her. Yeah. Except that there's a whole bigger conflict at play that she doesn't find out about until the 1st book. And it kind of just spirals from there and keeps getting bigger. I'm just like, this is getting ridiculous because I'm like, I'm so stressed already by the first 3 books, and then the 4th book happened, and it's like a Russian nesting doll, where it's like, you open it, and you're like, oh, there's something else in there. You open it, there's something else in there. This book, literally opened it, and there was like 3 things in there, and I'm like, why would you do this to me?
That's awesome.
Who gave you the right?
That's great.
So that was my experience with that. I'm clearly not over it, in case you were wondering.
It's a little
Speaking of other things that, you know, gave me emotional whiplash, we're gonna revisit Lore now.
Yeah.
So by the time you see this video, Lore will have just come out, so I would highly encourage you to read it. It is a fantasy standalone, young adult. My favorite things about it are the Greek mythology aspect, because I think not only are the details from actual Greek myth woven into this so well, I also like the fact that the tone of this story and like the levels of brutality and like sort of all of these things that you kind of experience with reading the original Greek myths, it's kind of in the story
absolutely
as well.
Oh, you know what? That's a great thing. That is true.
I really like that because it's such a clever way to sort of, like, you're not just giving them details from the story, you're also giving them the feel of it. So it's like a modern day Greek myth.
No, absolutely. And all the Greek myths are pretty gruesome if you think about it. The decapitations,
there's no mercy, basically.
And that savagery is
Isn't
captured.
It
That's great.
Yeah.
That's true. I didn't notice that.
And I'm also kind of partial to stories set in New York. I love tournament stories, love Greek mythology, and I really like Lore. I think for me, actually, the reason why this book ended up being such like a book that ended up being close to my heart is because I enjoyed watching Melora. Like, I love that she is basically coerced back into this world that she doesn't want to be a part of anymore. Like, she's retreated from it. She's like, bye, peace out, y'all. I'm gonna live my life. But she's kind of forced back into it by the presence of those 2 people that Macky mentioned earlier. And yet, by the end of the book, you actually see her actively making a choice to stay engaged in it. Yep. Because honestly, at any point in the story, she could have just been like, bye, peace out, y'all. I'm out.
Right.
Could have done it, didn't do it, and then she finds herself embroiled in it and determined to, you know, play her part as she has to in it. And it's just so good. I love her defiance too. I love her wit. And it's also fun because in most Alex Bracken books, she kind of writes secondary characters that also feel like found family, and they're always unexpected.
Yeah.
They're like, with the exception of maybe the Black Betty gang, who came as a package deal.
That's true. You
like,
so you sort of just threw them all in a van, and then just, that's it.
In her other books, it's sort of like they get collected. So it's like one here, one here, one here, and that happens in this book too, and it's super enjoyable. So highlight, very much a highlight.
Agreed.
Anything you want to add?
I just think that I want to be like Alex Bracken when I grow up. Like that's the kind of writer I aspire to just. I had a hard time reading actual novels this year, and that's why most of the books that I read, for those of you who follow me on Goodreads, were all graphic novels because I just couldn't, like, it was hard to focus. But the minute I picked Laura up, and I started so many books that I have not even finished to this day, but this book, riveted from, like, I finished in like a day.
Yeah, you read it so fast. I was so surprised.
You know, I had almost given up on myself in 2010. I was like, I think I've lost my reading groove. Then I read Laura and I'm like, nope, I just haven't found the right books that fit fit my season. And so to me that's how good it was. Yeah. So pick it up. And it's a one shot. It's great.
Yeah,
I don't have to wait for the next book,
and it's like,
yeah.
So
that's super cool.
Anyway,
alrighty.
We finally made it to the end of our best books of 2020 video. We hope you enjoyed all of our sort of incoherent fandom rambling, because there was a lot of that for sure.
We're a little subdued. It is like just the first couple of days into the new year. So
yeah, but if you've read any of our favorites and they're also part of your favorites list, we'd love to know. If you have anything you think we would like that was on your list that wasn't on ours, also give us a shout out, because we like knowing what everyone likes. What's your if anything, give us your top 3, because I'm
that'll be cool. That'll be cool, and then we're happy to sort of like trade these and go, okay, I'm gonna put that on my 2021 pile, see how that goes.
Yeah.
Coming soon. The pile of possibilities.
Yeah, we have something new coming. Not so new, but, you know, kinda.
Rebranding is fun.
It really is. Anyway, we hope you guys had a lovely turn of the year, and hope that this year is better for all of us in general. I think we deserve that. And we will see you guys with a new video soon. Bye!